last session of the day. Thanks for sticking it out. So my name is Josh West, and I'm a senior partner at Analytics Demystified. Over the last 15 years or so, I've done a lot of different things in digital marketing. I worked in the consultancy group at Omniture, and then for about 6 weeks at Adobe, mostly on the implementation side. I worked both in online marketing and in IT at Salesforce.com, managing all of our digital analytics tags. For the past 5.5 years, I've been at Demystified, and I lead our tag management practice there. So I've got a lot of years doing a lot of different things. I put my contact information up here if you want to find me. I'm not super active on Twitter, but I do occasionally comment on the Measure Slack board if anybody is familiar with that. My email address is there too if you want to get a hold of me. So first of all, got a question for everybody. So who is in IT? Okay. How about marketing? Who's in marketing? Okay. You raise your hand for both. Okay. So that's good. So I've spent over the course of my career, I've spent probably about equal parts of my career on both sides. So I've heard every excuse in the book about why marketing and IT don't get along or why they fight about certain things. So hopefully, we're going to talk a little bit about that and about a few other things. But really, I think over the past 6-7 years or so, I think one thing that I've realized is that I really love tag management. I think it's a great, there's a whole lot of great tools to help both marketers and IT be successful. But one of the things that I've seen is that the early days were really, really rough in the industry. And so I've seen, I've seen a lot of companies make mistakes. I've seen some companies do some really good things. And so I wanted to kind of go over some of those things that we've seen a lot of our clients do to be successful or less successful. I want to start first. We don't have a huge group, but I want everybody to stand up. This will be short, I promise. But and some of you might sit down really quickly. Hopefully not, though. So if you are not using a tag management system of some sorts, doesn't have to be Telium, sit down. Everybody using tag management? Good. All right. If you either don't have a data layer or your whole tag management system is based on scraping the DOM, sit down. Anybody doing that still? Good, that's awesome. Okay, so if your company is still using the very first tag management system that you ever either purchased or adopted, sit down. Very first one, awesome. Okay, that could be a good or a bad thing, okay? And then if you are not using Telium, go ahead and sit down. Everybody using Telium here? Okay, cool. All right, everybody can sit down. I just wanted to kind of get a feel for the room and see what's going on. So things change a lot, and so I thought it would be worthwhile if we start this conversation by taking a step back and sort of a brief history of tag management and how we got to the point we're at today. And then there are 4 different topics that I want to hit that I think are issues or pain points that a lot of companies face when they try to evaluate where they're at in their tag management efforts. So we're going to talk about how marketing and IT work together. We're going to talk about the state of your data layer, the impact that tag management has or maybe doesn't have on page load time, and JavaScript tags versus server-side tags. And through it all, I'm going to mix in some features that Telium offers that I think really can make your job easier if you're not taking advantage of them already. So let's start with a brief history of tag management. So if you've been around as long as me, you may remember this, the hit counter. Anybody remember the hit counter? So I remember the very first day I was at my first job out of college. They sat me down, and they always had the really new people do like their SEO, and this was in the early 2000s, so analytics, but almost no one did analytics in those days. So basically that meant that we actually had a couple of these hit counters on our client sites. That was how we counted stuff, and it's crazy to think about now. But in the early days, we were basically dealing with server logs and hit counters, and that's how people counted things. They worried about page views and visits and visitors. In the early, in the late 90s, early 2000s, that was when the first JavaScript-based solutions started to show up. So these are probably all names that you're familiar with, but Omniture, Urchin, DoubleClick, Website Story. These were, a lot of these companies, we don't call them by these names anymore, but they're still all over the industry. And that led us to what I call the acquisition era, where those companies we looked at on the last couple of slides started to get swooped up. And so Google bought Urchin and DoubleClick, Adobe bought Omniture, IBM. So in 2008 alone, Adobe bought Omniture and IBM bought both Unica and Core Metrics. So that was like a really big year in the space. So that led us to this era that I call the tag wrangling era. So as more and more companies started using JavaScript tags for tracking, companies really started to realize they had a problem with tags and how to maintain and manage all of them. So and the way that it sort of worked was that a lot of consultancies and agencies that were out there, they were tasked with managing all these tags, and so they were sort of the first place where actual products started to emerge. So I remember I was at Omniture, and it was the very first time that I met Mike Anderson, who's the CTO at Telium now, and we were both working with the same client. We got on the phone, and they're like, yeah, we found this really cool company that they're telling us they've got this thing called the universal tag. And we're like, well, that sounds kind of too good to be true. And it was, because in the early days, the only way that the universal tag worked is if you were lucky enough to employ Mike Anderson to manage all your tags. That's the only way it worked. If you had somebody that was that smart that could do it, most companies didn't. And so the next phase was these companies started to have to productize their solutions into actual tag management systems that they could release to the public. And so, that's why Telium started out as a consultancy, then released a product. Strategent released Insight, and Search Discovery released Satellite. And all of these tools were basically initially just to help them do their jobs better. And then they realized that there was a market for it. And so, the early days of tag management, like I said, it was pretty rough. These tools really couldn't do a whole lot, but it sort of set the stage for where we'd end up. And so that led into, at the end of 2013, Adobe bought Satellite from Search Discovery, and that was a really interesting point in the history of tag management, because all of a sudden there were two companies. And so Google had just barely released Google Tag Manager, and now Adobe had this Satellite product, and now there were two companies giving it away for free. And so that forced tag management companies to really diversify and really make sure that they had something that they could offer that was, it wasn't just that was worth paying for. And so, some of the companies did a better job than others at this. And so, but really, I think what it did, at least in the space, in the tag management space, is for some companies it stifled the innovation a lot. Because once there's somebody giving it away for free, why spend a lot of time building on it? The companies that have found a way to diversify their products and have managed to still reinvest some of the money in tag management, companies like Telium, they're the ones that have found a way to keep a hold in the market, where a lot of them have just sort of fallen off. So that's kind of where we're at, and that's at least my take on the history of the last 10 years or so of tag management. But that's where we're at, and now that we've sort of set that stage, that foundation, we're going to talk a little bit about some of these struggles that I think all companies make. And some of these struggles are directly related to that history, to the fact that 5 years ago, Adobe bought Satellite, and then all of a sudden, tag management became a commodity to a certain extent. So, like I said, we're going to talk about marketing and IT and the struggle that sometimes exists between them. Data layers, what it means to have, how do you know if your data layer is a good data layer versus a bad one? Page load performance and how tag management can help you to improve page load performance. And then server-side tags, which I sometimes think of as a little bit of a catch-22. There are pros and cons to server-side tags. So let's start with marketing versus IT. And I hope that you guys will take away from this that it doesn't have to be a struggle. I think a lot of companies do struggle with it, but it doesn't have to be. So who can think back to the very first experience you had with the sales rep for the very first tag management system you paid for? Was it like this a little bit? I remember so many different people telling me, oh, and you'll never have to work with your IT team again. Well, at the time I was at Salesforce, I was a developer. I was a developer, but I worked with online marketing because online marketing got so sick of IT telling them, we don't have a developer to work on that they said, fine, we're going to hire our own. And he's going to report to us. And so we had code releases every day. So they pulled us in. The marketing team said, hey, we want you to look at this product. It's a tag management system. I won't tell you which one. It wasn't Telium. But we sat through this demo, and I was like, I don't get it. Basically, all it was a code repository that was outside of our normal code repositories. We had a way to get code to the website every day. We didn't need, that. We had really strict security policies in place at Salesforce, and they didn't want remote JavaScript on the site unless they knew exactly where it was coming from and they could ensure that it wasn't going to add more remote JavaScript. And I told them that. I said, I don't think this is the tool for us. If it's not going to really make life easier for the marketers, it sure doesn't make life any easier for me. I can write my own code in any UI that you give me. I can write code. It doesn't matter to me. But I think a lot of salespeople sold marketing on, you get to divorce your IT department if you sign up for tag management. And the honest truth was that's just not possible. And so I think they did themselves a disservice by trying to promise that without having the tools to back it up. So I sort of think that the problem stems from IT and marketing view the world in two different ways. So IT thinks of everything as, oh crap, it's going to break something, it's going to cause extra work for me, and so they try to lock everything down as much as they can. Now, marketing sort of thinks of everything in terms of, everything's an opportunity. There's just a big open field that, whatever we can get out there is going to help the business, is going to help drive sales. And they really do view the world sometimes in two different ways. And it's up to, to all of us to sort of make sure that we're collaborating better and that we're finding ways to reduce friction. So here's a few suggestions for you. So first of all, cross-training. So by raise of hands, when you implemented tag management system at your company, who had like your most junior developer do your data layer? Anybody do that? I can't tell you how many clients I've had do that over the years. So you spend all this money on a tag management system, and then you hand it over to a guy who just got there last week, right out of college, and he's going to build out your data layer and solve all your problems. Well, no, he's probably not. So, or maybe you do what Salesforce did, and you go out and you say, well, IT won't let us use one of their developers, so we're going to find our own. I hope I was a little bit more experienced in that, but I think a lot of companies make that mistake. So cross-train. So don't just put your most junior developer on the project, and let your application and your analytics developers work together. and let them see the value that each other provides on the project, and make sure that they're training each other and learning at least a little bit of what the other does to sort of learn the skills that are important. So another one is, if you use Scrum, I think most companies do, but make sure that your Scrum teams are representative of your whole organization. So when I got to Salesforce, so for the first month or so, the website was run by Scrum teams, managed by Scrum teams that didn't really ever think of analytics. And there was also the product management team got really frustrated because they didn't know how to get, or product marketing didn't know how to get content onto the website about the products. The marketing team was, they were focused on, well, what does the nav look like and what does the homepage banner? So the vice president of product marketing went and complained to the CMO and said, we've got to find a better way to do this. And so we all got called to this big training. And we broke everybody out into different Scrum teams. So there was a Scrum team for every product that Salesforce had, and every team had at least some representation from analysts. They were required, when they'd plan things out, when they do sprint planning, to think of analytics up front. And then we do a sprint retrospective at the end of each month, and we actually had to have data to back it up. So if you'd launched a website and you hadn't tracked it, then you were going to look really stupid in sprint planning if somebody got up and said, well, actually, this thing you did, it actually decreased the leads on the website. That was a dumb idea. So it really forced everybody to work better together. There were IT people, marketing people, analysts. Everybody was involved in the project, and it made things go a lot more smoothly. Now, the last thing is, so everybody in here is a Telium customer. There's a lot of really cool features. Most of you are probably using them already, but they can make your job a lot easier and make it easier for marketing and IT to coexist. So first of all, has everybody seen this new merge versions feature? So it's newish, I guess, like within the last 6 months. But if you save something using the Save As option in Telium, and then somebody else goes in and does their own thing, now you can actually merge them together. Lots of tag management systems for years have had the ability to choose selectively, oh, I want to deploy this to dev, I want to deploy this to QA, I want to deploy this to prod. But this is actually the way IT thinks of merging. And it makes things a lot better and easier. And I think it's a lot easier for IT to get behind something that they understand. So the next thing is, so when you do this merge versions, you get the option at, when you go to save, to choose what you want to merge in from previous versions. And so that's, it's super helpful. Who's used the new JavaScript code extension? This is only in the last couple of weeks, but it is like the coolest thing I've seen in years. It's got syntax highlighting, you can collapse code, you can add conditions. So just like you can with any other type of extension, you can apply conditions to it. You can now do that with JavaScript code extensions. So you don't have to write your own logic in for conditions. You can have the UI do it for you. And you can diff code, which is, it's amazing that you couldn't do it sooner, but you can diff code. The other cool thing is you can do drafts. So you can write some code, you can test it out in dev, and you don't have to worry about someone accidentally publishing it or promoting it to QA or prod, which is the way it used to be in Telium and really still is in like every other tag management system. You can say, nope, this draft of my code is only for dev. And you have to go in and specifically toggle it when you're ready to promote it to anything else. Now, the one thing to be aware of is these JavaScript code extensions, if you want to use this kind of extension, you actually have to go convert all of your old JavaScript code extensions. It's not a seamless upgrade. But you can go in pretty easily and do that if you need to. So I guess the key takeaway here is, a lot of times I think marketing and IT sort of think of themselves as a football team. So the offense does a drive, they score, they come off the field, the defense goes out. But really, we should be working like a basketball team instead. So a good basketball team has defensive specialists and offensive specialists, but you have to be able to run the floor and play both sides. So make sure that your marketing and your IT teams understand what the value that the other side provides, and that they're collaborating together. All right, so the next thing that I want to spend a few minutes on is the data layer. And really, you guys probably all know this already, but if you get just one thing right in your tag management implementation, the data layer is what you should focus all of your efforts on. Because if you get it right, it just makes everything a lot easier. So if we go back to the early days of tag management, companies set up their analytics implementations just like the guys in this picture. And they would look all over each page for the data that they needed. Hey, look, I found my product ID. It's buried right down here at the very bottom of the page in this one DOM attribute. And it just doesn't work. And really, Telium was the only company that started with an emphasis on the data layer. So I remember the very first time that I saw a demo of Telium, and what really struck me was that the whole thing was integrated with the data layer. And it didn't really matter where the data came from. It could still come from cookies or query parameters of the DOM. But by taking the time to define your data layer and integrating it with the product, it made setting up tags so much easier. It no longer was just a code repository. It was there was a much easier way to, it allowed them to offer a lot of integrations with different vendors and to build them and scale them and let companies really take advantage. All the other tag management companies that I work with, they even had this thing they would refer to your data layers. Like any company would ever want to have to manage more than one data layer on their website. And I think what they were referring to was, well, you might find some of your data in cookies and you might scrape some of it from the DOM. So they would call your cookies a data layer, and your query parameters a data layer. But what Telium said is, no, it's all one big data layer. And the way we're going to build our product is, our product's going to find all of that data for you. You don't have to worry about it. It's just there. And then you worry about creating your own data object, get it locked down, define it clearly, and then we'll just take care of it. We'll offer, like if you're an e-commerce company, they've got the e-commerce extension, which makes every single tag implementation so much easier. Okay? So, yeah, like I said, they automatically find the data that you expect to be in the data layer anyway. And the other cool thing about Telium is if you're using Audience Stream or Event Stream or data access, basically all those data sources on the other side of the platform already get added right into TiQ for you to use. So if you feel like you're looking at this presentation, you're like, oh crap, we've totally screwed up our data layer. One thing you need to know right off the bat is you're not alone. Like most companies do not do it right the first time. But once you've gone through the effort of doing it once and you've got the tag management system on your site and you've moved your key tags into the tag management system, it becomes something that you can kind of fix on the fly. You can fix one or two data elements at a time, get them squared away, and then move on. So remember that. And remember too that the time that you take up front to invest on a good data layer, you'll reap the rewards downstream. So here are a couple of keys that I would give you to a future-proof data layer. So a data layer that's going to stand the test, any test that your website throws at it. So the three areas are documentation, collaboration, and consistency. So first of all, when it comes to documentation, when we work with our clients, we give them something like this spreadsheet here. So it lists every data element that needs to be part of your implementation. It gives a friendly name and then a name for like the developers to use or the name that you'd see in TiQ. It lists all of the pages and all of the events where we might need that data element. And it says how is it set? So is it set through an extension in Telium? Does IT set it? Is it just a query parameter or a cookie that we just know is going to be there? And when you have this documentation in place, you can keep track of everything and have a much better handle on your implementation. So if you don't really know where to start by putting together documentation like that, it's really easy because all you got to do is log in. Log in, go to the data layer tab, and so much of what you need is already there waiting for you, which is another big difference between Telium and some of the other tools on the market. Like I said, they've done so much integration with your data, with the data layer, that it makes it really easy to find what you're looking for. So another tip that I'll give you is collaboration. So I have a lot of clients that say, oh, we want to use the W3C spec, or like we want our data layer to, they have these very specific rules. And I usually say, I don't really care. It doesn't matter that much, as long as everybody in your company agrees and you've got documentation behind it. If you have people that say we want to use the W3C spec, and you're using Telium, and that means that you need to use their UDO format, it's okay. You can write a quick extension that does a conversion. It's not that hard. But the key thing is that you have buy-in, that people agree on it. That when you come up with names for all of your data layer elements, that everybody understands them. That you don't have one part of the company thinking one thing about the data and somebody else thinking something different. And data may come from different sources, cookies or query parameters. So you want to make sure that whoever owns those cookies, or whoever's responsible for making sure those query parameters are there, are involved in the discussion. I've seen lots of companies say, oh, we're going to change this name of this cookie because we don't think it's the right name. And then it just breaks the whole implementation. But if you have good data layer documentation, you've got people collaborating and talking together, you can avoid that. The more people that you have buy in and sign off, the less problems you're going to have. So the last thing is consistency. So I always tell my clients, when it comes to the data layer, that you want to break down the elements in your data layer to their lowest possible level. Because you can always use an extension and combine them back together in TiQ. But once you put them together, it's a lot harder to break them apart. So like a good example would be, most companies, for Adobe Analytics, you use a page name. For Google Analytics, you use a URL, so it may not be quite the same thing. But for this page name, usually there's a very consistent format for the page name. And you may have, the IT team originally 10, 15 years ago may have implemented Adobe Analytics with the idea that they were responsible for all the logic for page names. But if you break it down into, usually it's a combination of like the type of page and maybe the product name or the site section. If you break it down, then you can put that logic back together in Telium, and then if you need to make a change or you have a new template get added, you don't have to involve your IT team to make the change. All you need to do is make sure that your data layer is up to date. Another common problem is for companies to do a code release and then realize that they forgot to worry about the tracking. You go live and you added a new button on your site, a new CTA, and you're no longer tracking the clicks. Well, it's fine to go in and use TiQ, use one of the event handler extension, an event extension to track it. But then make sure that you follow the rules. You go back and you have IT or marketing or whoever go back and comply with the rules that you've set up, and then remove the hacks later on. Hacks are great, but remove them as soon as you can so that you're not left with a mess you have to maintain going forward. Another thing is make sure you name your data layer of elements consistently on every page. So another problem that we see a lot of our clients make when they come to us and they say, we've got problems, please help us. And we see that their list of product IDs is called one thing on the product detail page, and one thing on the cart, and one thing on the order confirmation page. And then it's just a big mess, especially if you want to use the e-commerce extension, because that relies on consistency. So I guess the key takeaway here is, as you go through and you make changes to fix your data layer, make sure that you're using painter's tape and not duct tape. So we built a house a couple years ago. We went in at the end, and we found that they had tried to seal off some of our tile with duct tape. And we pulled off the duct tape, and there was just this crap all over the floor that we had to scrape off very carefully. You don't have that problem with painter's tape, so just remember that. And remember that if you divorced your IT team when you implemented tag management, if you want to get a good data layer, if you don't have one and you want to go back and fix it, you're going to have to get back together, at least for a few months. So just remember that. All right, so the next thing that I want to talk about a little bit is page load time. And it's true, it took a while, but companies really do, I think, finally realize its importance. So it's Tuesday, it's not Thursday, but I want to do a throwback back to 2010. So I was at Salesforce.com. I'd been there for about 8 months, and we had, a few months before, we had finished our re-implementation of Adobe Analytics. We'd gone through and made all these great changes. We had a data layer before anybody was even talking about a data layer. And we realized that we were really bored because we had fixed the analytics, and that's what we were brought on to do. And so we got picked up on, we got adopted into this project that was going on. IT showed up at a meeting, and they had some really nasty numbers about how slow our homepage was. It was like over 6 seconds in the US, and worldwide, every other market was like a lot more than that. And people were just really upset about how long it took for the homepage to load. And so there was this sort of this SWAT team that was involved in fixing this problem. And so there was an application development team that was going through and working on implementing Akamai. So we were going to start speeding up how fast all the assets got delivered. There was a really sharp front-end developer that basically stripped down the homepage and rebuilt it component by component to work faster, to minimize the amount of JavaScript we were loading. What I got pulled in to do was fix our web forms. So we had like 150 different forms on the US site. And the thing about Salesforce was we used this CMS called OpenCMS. Has anybody ever used OpenCMS? It was really open-ended and flexible, but what it did was it gave all of our web producers the ability to treat every page on the site like a work of art. So they would come and say, I need this new page, here's the design that the designers gave me, and then they would say, we want you to build this for us. And so the developer would then take another template, copy it, and all of the tags that were embedded into that template would go along for the ride. And so every form was, not only did it have too many tags, but all of these tags were slowing down the website. The security team didn't want them on the site. And so the job that they gave me was, they said, we want you to rebuild all these 150 or so forms, and they need to load faster, and they only need to have the right tags on them. It was a little daunting. So over the next 6 weeks or so, I was kind of like an FBI agent. I was like going through template by template looking for tags that didn't belong there. I came up with, I think, 4 or 5 templates that we then had to migrate all 150 forms onto one of those templates. And we refactored all the JavaScript. I wrote this like mini tag management system that basically gave us the ability to put any tag we wanted on any site or on any page of the website, and it broke it down into its lowest level elements. And it was actually pretty sophisticated to the point that I left in 2013, and I don't think Salesforce even implemented a tag management system until like 2015. So I was pretty proud of it. But all the same, the day that we went live, I was just like, I was fingers crossed, saying prayers, hoping that everything would work out. And what we found was even more than we could have ever hoped for. So the load time of the homepage alone went down by 50% to like 3.5 seconds. All of the forms, I think, went down by even more than that. They had a lot less assets, so like most of those were loading in under 3 seconds. Leads went up by 15%, and we didn't even change any of the content, any of the calls to action, nothing. All we did was made those pages load faster. And after that, we really had 100% organizational support anytime we ever said performance is a problem, because they had numbers to back it up. They knew that page load time was important. And so it may sound crazy, but if my little homegrown TMS would speed up page load time by that much and all the other things we did, tag management, an actual tool, has to speed up page load times. There's just no doubt about it. So I know a lot of companies, a lot of my clients come to me and they say, our IT team says that our tags are slowing down the site. And I almost always say, I don't believe it. I just don't believe it. Because I implemented your tag management system and I know it's not a problem. So what's really going on? So the first thing is, number one, someone doesn't actually know what page load time measures. Number two, someone's comparing apples to oranges instead of apples to apples. And number three, someone, sometimes it does happen that someone configured the tag management system wrong. So the first one, page load time is notoriously complicated. So when it comes to, it could be, geography, connection speed. I could have my laptop and my iPhone in the same room loading the same page, but one from a 4G connection and one from the Wi-Fi, and those two page load time numbers are going to tell me totally different things. And then when you think about responsive websites, mobile apps, like there's a million different reasons that the numbers could be bad besides all your stupid tags. It could be the tags, but a lot of times people just don't know what the numbers actually mean. And the definitions that they use could be misleading or different. So it's really great that browsers have all of these data points that they can use to evaluate how fast your page actually loads. But depending on which one you pick, it could mean something totally different than what you think. I had a client one time say to me, they're telling us our page is slow, and the measurement they were using was the window load event, which is like the very last thing to happen. And we had set all of the tags to fire asynchronously when the DOM became interactive. So it's like, I don't really care what happens on the window load event. It means nothing to me. Now, it's important that to limit the tags and limit the resources loading, but all this stuff really, for a regular desktop website, doesn't really matter that much. It matters more for mobile websites and mobile apps, and so it's important to keep that in mind. But I think a lot of times companies say, hey, your page is loading slow, and they don't really know what they're talking about, or they're using the wrong numbers to make that judgment. But there are still a few things that Telium can do to help. So who spends much time in the advanced settings for each tag? You may not. But every tag has these three options, and I think they're sometimes kind of misunderstood, or people just don't know what they do. They just leave them alone. So the wait flag says, and it's almost always turned on to yes by default. It says, hey, wait, don't fire this tag until the DOM is ready. And if you just leave that at yes, it's going to solve like 95% of your problems. And if you leave the synchronous load type to no, it's going to solve 95% of your problems. But another really cool thing that you can do is that top option, the bundle flag. And I think it's one that not enough customers take advantage of. Tag bundling. So I took this screenshot from a former client. This is what you see on their homepage. And the list goes longer than that. But these are all of the scripts that Telium is loading on their website. It's like 25 different tags on the homepage. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is that every tag that matches a load rule in Telium is going to load one of those utag.some number files. That's just the way the tool is designed. But a lot of those tags you use on every page. And so if you're bundling, that bundling option says, hey, load this file instead into utag.js, which means it gets cached in the very first page load. And sometimes, though, each of those files are only 25 or 30 lines long worth of code. So if you're bundling them, you're saving network traffic, and you're really only making utag.js a little bit longer. And so one of the things that we try to do with our clients is, we see this very common problem where, maybe they say, well, I've got these 5 floodlight tags, and I need tag A on page A, and I need tag B on page B, and you end up with 5 tags that you have to manage. Do you know what the difference is? How many actual characters of code differs between any of these tags? It's probably like 15 or 20 characters, bytes. And so what we try to get our clients to do instead is use a couple lookup extensions and populate the things that are different using data. So it all comes back to the data. And then use one tag, fires on all pages, and only uses the data that it needs. Now, instead of, I visited all 5 of those pages on my visit, and I loaded a new file on each page. Now I loaded one, the very first page, and every other page used it. And that saves a lot. So if your tag management system, if you're getting blamed for poor page load performance, look first at how it's configured. There's probably a lot of little things that you can do to clean it up and make it work better. Okay? Make sure also that that the definitions are right, that you understand exactly what the numbers are that are being reported to you. Because there's a good chance too that you're not causing any problems at all. So just be aware of that. All right, so the very last thing that I want to go over is JavaScript versus server-side tagging. And really when it comes down to it, the key takeaway is that there's just no magic bullet. So everybody saw Event Stream on the main stage today, and it's awesome. But there are times when it might not be the right solution for you. So first of all, what is server-side tagging? So the original definition, I think, of server-side tagging was the way that like Insight and Signal defined it, which was server-side tagging is we're going to make the decisions for which tag should load on the server rather than in the browser. And it became quickly obvious that that gained you almost nothing. And so server-side tagging really now means what they talked about earlier, where instead of sending all the requests out from the browser, you send one to this thing called an event gateway, and then from there you send it to the different vendors that you need. So the weight, all of the extras, so those 25 files that we looked at a few slides ago, we're going to take all of those out of the browser, or as many of them as we can, and we're going to have that happen on the server instead. We're going to send one request out to the gateway, and we're going to let the gateway do the rest. And that generally works really well for most things. And there are a lot of valid reasons to do it. So things like performance concerns or mobile apps or mobile dedicated mobile websites, totally valid reasons to do server-side tagging. A lot of companies just want to do it though because it's the shiny object. It's the next big thing, and that's never a good reason to spend money. Or they may want to do it because they screwed up the tag management system the first time, and they think, oh, well, I'll get it right this time with server-side. Well, what they don't realize is that if you have problems with one tool, chances are you'll have problems with the next tool too. So just remember that. The tool, so often we try to blame our problems on tools, and it's not the tools, it's the people using the tools that are causing the problem. So when is server-side a good decision? When is it not? So there are a few pros. So the first one is you avoid certain client-side issues, ad blockers. So we talked a lot about, this morning they talked about the ITP settings in Safari. Server-side tagging is a really great way to overcome some of those issues. Connection speed, so if you're looking at, if you've tagged a mobile app and people are going to use that mobile app on the BART when they go home tonight, and they're going to go through a tunnel and lose connection for 5 minutes, or connection speed can be a really valid reason to do server-side tagging. You can batch some of those requests, you can send them later, there's all kinds of cool things you can do. And you will get some performance boost even on just a regular desktop website. But it comes at a higher cost. So it's either a more expensive tool or an addition to a tool you've already paid for. You do get less access to some of the data that you might rely heavily on tracking. So if you can get all that data into your data layer and pushed off to Telium, then that solves most of the problem. But if you're tracking a lot of user interactions, it still is going to take a request to get that update or refresh of the data out to the cloud. And it can really be a nightmare for A/B testing and optimization, because those tools are updating the content on the page in real time, and so it can pose a real problem. At this point in time, some server-side, a lot of server-side solutions have fewer integrations available. That'll probably change with time. So, I mean, Telium, like they showed today, they had all those really slick integrations. There still are fewer integrations that you've got just on the TiQ client side. But one of the real cool things about Event Stream is that because Telium places so much emphasis on the data, that Event Stream can do things that you never really would even have thought of as tag management. So, I mean, like Google Sheets connectors or Slack integrations, or pushing segments down to your different vendors. Like, there's all kinds of stuff that you can do with Event Stream that you can't do with TiQ. That are really powerful use cases for it. So the takeaway with server-side is to use everything in your toolbox. One of the nice things, so if you do decide to do server-side tagging, and you're already using Telium and you just add Event Stream to what you're doing, the great thing is that you don't have to use a one-size-fits-all approach. You don't have to immediately convert all of your client-side tags over to server-side. You might say, well, Adobe or Google Analytics, we track a lot of stuff with those tags, and we're not ready to think about doing those server-side yet. But we've got a lot of advertising vendors that they don't really need much data, and they don't really care about much. So we're just gonna, we can offload some work there. So don't be afraid to evaluate your options as one vendor at a time, and make sure that you're getting the advantage out of it that you feel like your investment deserves. So at Analytics Demystified, so at my company, we hold a conference, and we haven't done it the last couple of years, but at our conference we do this thing called 10 tips in 20 minutes. And if you've ever been to it, it's kind of like a fire hose. Like, by the end of the day, like, it's a lot of information that gets thrown at you. But at the end of each presentation, we try to have the presenters offer a couple of takeaways, so that if you feel like you got drenched by a fire hose, you can say, well, there's a couple of things I can do tomorrow when I get back, or Monday when I'm back. And so I want to leave you with a couple of takeaways. So the first one is, whatever side of the aisle you're on, if you feel like your marketing and IT relationship could use a little attention, go home and get back together with marketing or with IT. There's a lot of quick things that you can do to make that relationship better. Number two, so if you haven't looked at your data layer in a while and you're wondering what the state of it is, find some time to really do an assessment and see what you've got, and if things have degraded a little bit, because it might have been great when you started, but things might have devolved a little bit. It happens to the best of us. And then the last thing is, think proactively about page load performance. So hopefully everybody's thinking about it, but if you haven't been thinking about page load performance, you can get some really basic usable data from Google Analytics with their site speed reports. Adobe's got a couple of plugins that make it pretty easy. I wrote a blog post a couple years ago about some really quick things you can do. Or if you're using other tools, App Dynamics or other tools like that give you better data, then go look at that, because you'll find some quick things you can do usually to increase page performance, and nothing makes IT happier than for you to be proactive about how you're dealing with page load time. So I hope those tips have been helpful. And the one last thing, it's kind of a shameless plug, but like I mentioned, my company, we haven't done our conference for a couple of years, but we're doing it again in January of 2019. We're actually going to be just down the road a little bit in Los Gatos near San Jose. And we're going to do a few different things besides just the 10 tips in 20 minutes this year. If you're interested, we'd love to have you, and you can register on our website, and I gave you a code, you can get 10% off. It's actually a pretty affordable conference too. So anyway, thanks for the time.